It is not about money or rockets or even failure. It's about a truth that crushes almost everyone who faces it. My hardest life lesson is so brutal that most people never recover from it. I lived through it, and I'll be honest, it nearly broke me. But instead of staying down, I turned that pain into the fuel that built Tesla, SpaceX, and everything that followed. And by the end of this, you'll understand the exact lesson that almost destroyed me and how to make sure it doesn't destroy you. Let's start with the trap most people never escape. The trap most people never escape. Most people believe the reason they're stuck in life is because they're not working hard enough. They think if they just grind more hours, if they stay up later, if they hustle harder, things will finally break open for them. But I've seen the opposite. I've watched brilliant people work themselves to the bone, pushing through sleepless nights, burning all their energy, and ending up in the exact same place. The truth is, the biggest trap you'll ever face isn't laziness, it's busyness. You know the feeling. You wake up and dive straight into your inbox. You answer messages, jump on calls, rush into meetings, tackle endless small tasks. At the end of the day, you're completely drained. But when you look back, you realize nothing meaningful actually moved forward. You were in motion, but you weren't making progress. And the scary part is that state of being constantly busy tricks you. It gives you the illusion that you're building a future, when in reality, you're just spinning in circles. That's exactly where I once found myself. In those early days, I was buried under chaos. I was coding, answering emails, jumping into meetings, fixing problems, writing more code, then back into another round of emergencies. It felt like I was working like a machine, but in truth, I wasn't building anything. I wasn't designing a future. I was reacting, not creating. And that's the trap most people never escape from. Because once you get pulled into that cycle, your mind convinces you that motion equals progress. You feel productive, but deep down, you know you're not moving closer to your real mission. And here's the painful truth. Most people never recover from that cycle. They waste years, even decades, keeping themselves occupied. They drown in tasks that don't matter. They avoid asking the hard question, am I actually building something meaningful? Because the answer terrifies them. So they keep running, hoping that all this motion will eventually lead somewhere. But it doesn't. It never does. That's when I learned the first part of my hardest life lesson. Comfort is not the same as safety. Being busy is not the same as progress. You can spend your life burning energy, reacting to everything around you, and never take a single step toward the thing you were actually meant to build. And unless you recognize this trap, it will bury you slowly until one day you wake up realizing you've been alive, but not really living. I had to learn this the hard way. Back then, I wasn't a billionaire. I wasn't the head of Tesla or SpaceX. I was just another young guy in America with almost nothing, sleeping on the floor of a tiny office, chasing a dream and realizing that the grind alone wasn't going to save me. That's where the real lesson began. Sleeping on the floor, rock bottom. When I first came to America, I didn't arrive with luxury. I didn't step off a plane into wealth or influence. I came with almost nothing. My first apartment wasn't even a real apartment. It was a small shared space with thin walls, secondhand furniture, and a futon on the floor that I used as a bed. Some nights I didn't even have a blanket. I was young, hungry, and chasing a dream so big that most people laughed when I spoke about it. I worked long days and even longer nights. I coded until my eyes blurred, lived on cheap food, and often went days without proper sleep. I had one pair of shoes, worn down at the soles, and sometimes I couldn't even afford a proper meal, but none of that scared me. What scared me was the silence. When nothing seemed to be moving forward, you push yourself harder and harder, but the results never come fast enough. That's the part that breaks people. Not the hunger, not the exhaustion, but the feeling that maybe it's all for nothing. Most people never recover from that stage of life. When you're broke, invisible, and no one believes in you, the temptation to quit becomes overwhelming. You tell yourself it's safer to lower your expectations, to stop reaching for something so impossible. You convince yourself that settling is wisdom, when really it's surrender. And once you surrender, it's over. That's why so many people never climb out of rock bottom. They take it as a grave instead of a foundation. For me, those nights on the floor became the test. I could have stopped, I could have accepted a stable job, lived an easier life, and let the dream die quietly. But I couldn't do it, because even in the silence, even in the failure, I knew I would rather sleep on a cold floor, chasing something impossible, than sleep in comfort, knowing I had given up. That was the choice that shaped me. And that's the second part of the hardest lesson I've ever learned. Rock bottom isn't the end unless you decide it is. It feels like destruction, but it can also be the beginning. You either let it crush you, or you turn it into the ground you build on. I chose to build. And looking back, that decision was the difference between being forgotten and building something that outlived me. But here's the truth, rock bottom wasn't the hardest blow I ever faced. Because even after I climbed out of it, after I built companies and found success, the universe had another test waiting, a test far more brutal than poverty, one that nearly erased everything. When success turns into collapse, after years of struggle, things finally started to turn. I had survived the futon nights, the meals I could barely afford, the endless days and nights of coding until I could hardly see straight. Eventually, there was a breakthrough. Zip2 sold, then PayPal. Suddenly, after years of nothing, I had everything. I had hundreds of millions of dollars in my account. For the first time in my life, I wasn't just surviving, I was secure. Most people would have stopped there. Most people would have taken the money and disappeared. They would have bought comfort, stability, maybe a quiet life on an island somewhere. They would have thought, I made it, I don't need to prove anything else. And honestly, no one would have blamed me if I had done the same. But that wasn't me. Because deep down, I didn't care about being rich. I cared about building something that actually mattered. I wanted to push humanity forward, not just make another piece of software, not just build another company to sell. I wanted to change the trajectory of the human story. And for me, that meant three things: electric cars, rockets, and a future where humanity could survive beyond Earth. So instead of protecting what I had, I did something that almost everyone thought was insane. I took nearly my entire fortune and poured it into two companies that everyone said would fail: Tesla and SpaceX. I was told over and over again that it was reckless, impossible, arrogant. I heard it from investors, friends, even people I trusted deeply, but I didn't listen, because to me, the mission was more important than my personal safety net. And that's when everything almost collapsed. SpaceX rockets exploded in midair, not once, but multiple times. Every failure wasn't just metal breaking apart in the sky, it was years of effort, millions of dollars, and the hopes of my entire team shattering in front of us. Tesla was running out of money faster than we could raise it. People were calling it a scam, saying it would never survive. The headlines mocked me. Late-night TV hosts turned me into a punchline. And behind the jokes and the headlines was a reality I couldn't ignore. I was running out of cash. The fortune I had built from PayPal, the security that could have lasted a lifetime, was nearly gone. There was a point where I had enough left for one more rocket launch. One. If it failed, SpaceX was finished. And if SpaceX died, Tesla would almost certainly collapse with it. Everything I had worked for, everything I had risked, would vanish in front of the entire world. Most people never recover from failure on that scale. It's one thing to fail in private, when nobody is watching, when you can quietly lick your wounds and move on. But it's another thing entirely to fail in front of millions of people. To have your name dragged through headlines, to hear people say, I told you so, as if your dream was always a joke. Public failure doesn't just take your money, it takes your confidence, it convinces you to never try again. That's why so many people never take the risk in the first place. Because deep down, they know they don't have the strength to stand up once the world celebrates their downfall. And I'll be honest with you, I came close to breaking. I had nights where I sat alone and thought, maybe they're right. Maybe this is impossible. Maybe I've made the biggest mistake of my life. The pressure was unbearable. I had employees depending on me, companies collapsing, and the entire world watching. There were times I wanted to quit, to walk away, to take what little I had left and disappear. But every time that thought came, something stronger pushed back: the mission, the belief that if I quit, the future I wanted to build would die with me. So I kept going. And when that final rocket launched, with everything on the line, against every odd stacked against us, it worked. It didn't just fly. It succeeded. That one success changed everything. It saved SpaceX, it saved Tesla, it brought investors back, it restored the mission. That single launch was the turning point that allowed everything you see today to even exist. And that's when another piece of the hardest life lesson came into focus. Failure is not the opposite of success. Failure is the price you pay to reach it. Every rocket that exploded, every investor who walked away, every sleepless night staring at numbers that didn't add up, those weren't setbacks. They were tuition. They were the cost of admission for the future I was determined to build. But here's the part almost nobody talks about. As brutal as failure was, as close as I came to losing everything, that wasn't the hardest blow. Because rockets and money can be rebuilt. Companies can rise again. The deepest wound came later when the people I trusted most turned their backs. Betrayal and isolation. Failure hurts, but betrayal cuts deeper. You can lose money, you can lose companies, you can lose rockets, and somehow find a way to recover. But when the people you trusted most turn their backs on you, the wound doesn't just hit your wallet, it hits your soul. I learned this in some of the darkest moments of my career, when Tesla was weeks away from collapse, when SpaceX was burning through cash with nothing but explosions to show for it, That's when I needed people the most. I needed belief. I needed loyalty. But that's exactly when people disappeared. Investors who had once cheered me on suddenly wanted nothing to do with me. Friends who used to call with encouragement stopped picking up the phone. Even inside the companies, I could feel the doubt growing, whispers, second guessing, people wondering if they had hitched their future to a sinking ship. And on top of all of that, my personal life was falling apart too. My relationships were breaking under the weight of the pressure. The long hours, the obsession with keeping the mission alive, it pushed people away. When you're consumed by a vision, you sometimes forget that the people around you need more than scraps of your attention. And the truth is, not everyone can carry the burden of standing beside you when the whole world thinks you're about to fail. That was the moment I realized something brutal. When things are easy, everyone wants to be by your side. Success attracts people like a magnet. But when the storms hit, when the money is gone, and the headlines turn ugly, when your name is mocked and your dream looks dead, that's when you discover who is truly with you. And in my case, the list was far shorter than I imagined. Most people never recover from betrayal like that, because betrayal doesn't just hurt, it plants doubt in your mind. You start to ask yourself, if they don't believe in me, maybe I shouldn't either. If they're walking away, maybe it's because they know something I don't. That voice can be louder than failure itself. And that's why betrayal destroys more dreams than bankruptcy ever could. But here's what I had to learn, and it was one of the hardest parts of this lesson. Your mission has to be stronger than your loneliness. If your vision depends on constant validation, it will die the moment validation disappears. And it always disappears. At some point, you will be alone with the dream. And if you can't carry it in that silence, it won't survive. So I chose to stand alone. I chose to carry the mission even when the people I trusted most doubted me. And what I found was this. When you stop chasing approval, when you build something so important that you'd fight for it even in isolation, the loneliness stops being a weakness. It becomes fuel. It becomes clarity. That's when I truly understood this wasn't just about companies or money or rockets. This was about identity, about who I was when everything else was stripped away. And the price of that realization was brutal, because the hardest lesson wasn't failure. It wasn't even betrayal. The hardest lesson was realizing what I would have to sacrifice of myself to keep moving forward. The hardest life lesson, sacrificing yourself. If failure almost broke me and betrayal cut me to the bone, then what came next was the lesson that nearly destroyed me completely, because it wasn't about rockets or money or headlines. The hardest lesson I ever had to learn was about sacrifice, the cost of giving everything, including yourself. People look at me today and imagine I've always been this disciplined, this focused, this relentless. They picture me as someone who wakes up with unlimited energy and charges through problems like a machine. But that's not the reality. The truth is, there were years where the cost of what I was building nearly destroyed me from the inside. I was working 100 hours a week, not for a month, not for a year, for years. I slept in Tesla factories on the floor, using a jacket as a pillow. I lived inside SpaceX hangars, going from meetings to coding to calls without ever leaving the building. Sometimes I didn't go home for days, and even when I did, my mind never shut off. My body was there, but my head was still in orbit, still inside the assembly lines, still trying to solve problems that seemed unsolvable. And here's the part that most people don't see. The cost wasn't just exhaustion. It was my health, my relationships, my peace of mind. My marriage fell apart. My family life suffered. I became a ghost in my own personal world, always present, but never really there. I was burning through myself just as quickly as I was burning through money. This is the hardest truth most people don't want to face. Everything has a price. Success demands payment. Sometimes that payment is time. Sometimes it's comfort. But if you're aiming high enough, if you're trying to build something truly impossible, the price is often yourself, your health, your happiness, your sanity. And most people can't recover from that. They reach the breaking point and collapse because they can't accept that greatness requires a piece of them they may never get back. I'm not telling you this to sound heroic. I'm telling you this because it almost broke me. There were nights where I wondered if I was trading my humanity for a dream. Nights where I questioned whether it was worth losing so much just to see this vision through. That's the razor's edge you walk when you're obsessed with building something that matters. The line between purpose and self-destruction. But here's what I learned, and this is the hardest life lesson of all. If you're not willing to pay the price, someone else will. The future doesn't wait for you. If you hesitate, if you cling to comfort, if you hold back because you're afraid of losing too much, then someone else will step in and take the spot that could have been yours. That's the reality most people can't accept. That's why they never recover. They think they can have it all without sacrifice, and when the bill comes due, they break.
I chose to keep paying. I chose to give pieces of myself over and over again because the mission was bigger than my comfort. It doesn't mean it was easy. It doesn't mean I came out without scars. It means I accepted the cost. And that decision, as brutal as it was, is the only reason Tesla and SpaceX are alive today. And this is where you come in, because this lesson isn't just mine. It's not just about rockets or cars. It's about you and what you're building. And the moment life forces you to answer the same question, what are you willing to sacrifice for the future you say you want? How you carry this lesson. I've told you the hardest lesson I've ever learned. And maybe, as you're listening, a part of you is thinking, that's Elon Musk. He builds rockets. He builds cars.
Of course, his life is extreme. But here's what I want you to understand. This lesson isn't about rockets or cars. It's about life. Your life. You may not be standing on the edge of bankruptcy with millions watching. You may not be trying to send humanity to Mars, but you are facing your own version of rock bottom, your own version of betrayal, your own version of sacrifice. For you, it might be a business you're trying to start. It might be a dream you've been postponing. It might even be the simple act of trying to live a life you're proud of, while the world tells you to stay small. And just like me, you will be tested. Most people never recover because they refuse to accept the cost. They cling to comfort. They drown in distractions. They convince themselves that being busy is the same as making progress. They wait for permission, for certainty, for the perfect moment. And when the test finally comes, when life demands payment, they break. They step back instead of forward. They give up the future they wanted because the price feels too high. But if you take one thing from my story, let it be this. You can recover from failure. You can recover from betrayal. You can even recover from being broken. What you cannot recover from is never trying at all. You cannot rebuild years wasted in comfort. You cannot buy back the time you spent avoiding the cost. So here's my challenge to you. Ask yourself right now, what is the thing you say you want, but you keep postponing? What dream do you keep burying under distractions? What vision do you pretend you'll chase someday when the timing is better? That is the thing that demands your sacrifice. That is the thing you must choose, even if it costs you comfort, approval, or safety. Because here's the truth. The hardest life lesson I've ever learned is not just mine. It belongs to anyone who dares to build something bigger than themselves. And the lesson is this: no matter what breaks you, no matter what you lose, no matter who walks away, you can rebuild stronger, but only if you're willing to pay the price. And that's why most people never recover. They refuse the cost. They run from the pain. They tell themselves comfort is enough, but comfort is never enough. Not if you were born to build, not if you were meant for more. So tomorrow, when you wake up, I want you to remember this. You don't need 100 hours a week. You don't need billions of dollars. You don't need to be me. What you need is the courage to accept the cost of your own mission, to pay for your future with focus, with sacrifice, with resilience, because the world won't hand you your dream. The world will test you, break you, strip you bare. And in that moment, you'll face the same choice I did: quit or build anyway. My hardest life lesson is this: everything comes with a price. And if you're willing to pay it, no matter how much it hurts, you will rise where others fall. That is the difference between those who never recover and those who change the world. The cost of greatness. My hardest life lesson is this: everything in life has a price. Comfort, progress, freedom, impact, none of it is free. And most people never recover because they refuse to pay that price. They cling to safety, they chase distraction, they wait for the perfect moment that never comes. They want the reward without the sacrifice, the success without the scars. But that's not how life works. The truth is, you can recover from failure. You can recover from losing money. You can even recover from betrayal. What you cannot recover from is never trying. You cannot rebuild the years you waste hiding in comfort. You cannot buy back the time you spend avoiding the hard choices. Time is the one currency you never get back, and most people spend it like it's endless, only to wake up too late, realizing they've run out. The difference between those who change the world and those who disappear quietly is not intelligence or talent or luck. It's not about being the smartest in the room or the most gifted. It comes down to this: the ones who rise are the ones who accept the cost. They pay with focus, with resilience, with nights of doubt and days of exhaustion. They pay by giving up comfort for the chance to build something greater. And in the end, they are the ones who stand when everyone else has already fallen. And make no mistake, the cost will feel unbearable at times. It will take pieces of you you thought you couldn't give. It will demand sacrifice when you have nothing left to offer. It will strip you down until all that remains is the question: how badly do you want it? That is the moment that defines you. That is the moment that most people never recover from. They turn away, they fold, they let the dream die. So here's what I want you to remember. No matter what breaks you, no matter who walks away, no matter how heavy the cost feels, you can rebuild, you can rise again, you can take the pain, the failure, the loneliness, and turn it into fuel. But only if You choose to. That choice is everything. That choice is the line between mediocrity and greatness, because the cost of greatness is real and it is high. But if you're willing to pay it, if you're willing to sacrifice what others won't, then you will stand among the few who shape the future. That's the hardest life lesson I've ever learned. And it's the one truth that separates the people who never recover from the ones who change the world.